Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching with horror, but also admiration. We have breaking news this morning. Ukraine has agreed to talks with Russia as Russian forces continue their assault on Ukraine's largest cities. The talks could come as soon as today, and they will be held at the Belarusian border. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office. The news of talks comes as Russians advanced into Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, where street fighting broke out as Ukrainian forces try to hold back the invasion. In Ukraine's largest city, the capital, Kyiv, the mayor said this morning there was no Russian presence in the city. After massive explosions overnight near Kyiv, citizens there remain under curfew, and Ukraine says it intercepted a cruise missile from Belarus headed toward the capital. CNN is reporting that according to two senior U.S. officials, Russians have encountered, quote, stiffer than expected resistance from the Ukrainians. Late Saturday, the United States and Europe announced far-reaching new financial punishments against Russia designed to cripple the Russian economy, removing several Russian banks from the global financial system known as SWIFT. U.S. and European officials also committed to sanctioning the Russian central bank. That's according to people familiar with the move. And that move would be without precedent for an economy of Russia's size. We are starting to get a sense of the human cost of this war. According to the UN, there have been at least 240 civilian casualties, including at least 64 deaths since Russia launched its attack, and there are now 368,000 Ukrainian refugees. I want to go straight to the ground in Ukraine and begin with CNN chief international correspondent Clarissa Warr, who is live in Kyiv. Clarissa, Ukrainians are fighting to repel Russian troops in its major cities. What are you hearing and seeing about the latest efforts?
So there had been quite a lot of activity this morning, a lot of explosions, mostly in the distance. That has gone very quiet in the last 20 minutes or so. And it's unclear if that might be related to the news that you just mentioned, which is a big deal. Essentially, Ukraine agreeing to send a delegation to the Belarusian border near the Pripyat River to meet with a Russian delegation to presumably start negotiations to try to see if there is a way out of this disastrous war. Now, earlier in the day, President Volodymyr Zelensky had agreed in principle to negotiations, but had said that they would not agree to them in Belarus or near the Belarusian border because, needless to say, Belarus is not neutral territory here. This is where all of a huge amount of Russia's troops are actually pushing in from. Now, the Ukrainians put out a statement on their Facebook page where they said, on President Zelensky's Facebook page, where they said, the politicians have agreed that the Ukrainian delegation will meet with the Russian delegation without preconditions near the Pripyat River. Alexander Lukashenko, that's the leader of Belarus, has taken responsibility for ensuring that all planes, helicopters, and missiles stationed on the Belarusian territory will remain on the ground during the Ukrainian delegation's travel, meeting, and return. So essentially saying there, Dana, that they have extracted a sort of guarantee of security from President Lukashenko that this Ukrainian delegation will be safe when they travel to go and meet with this Russian delegation. Meanwhile, though, the situation on the ground has been a sort of continuous barrage from the Russian side, but they have definitely been finding themselves encountering much stiffer resistance. As you mentioned, that's according to U.S. intelligence sources, but also, frankly, just what we're seeing on the ground. The expectation had been that a city like Kyiv would fall in 1 to 4 days. We're now on day 4. The Ukrainians are saying that they thwarted the advance of a column of Russian tanks in the western part of the city. And while we did hear a lot of explosions last night, one particularly loud one that appeared to target a fuel depot, it is now, at this hour, earlier it was still pretty noisy, but now it does seem to be a bit quieter. And again, that may be because every side is waiting to see what, if anything, transpires from these negotiations, although I should say that as of now, we don't yet have a timing on when they might begin. Dana?
Yeah, Clarissa, we're going to talk a lot more about that announcement about talks, which is, as you said, huge, with our guests coming up. But because you are on the ground and you have been doing such important, amazing reporting. Can you just talk about the human element that you have seen, that you have witnessed? And frankly, because of social media, a lot of us have been able to see on our phones. You've seen it in person at subway stations, everyday Ukrainians kissing their children goodbye. What is that like, and what are you seeing with regard to that human side of this at this hour?
Yeah, I mean, Dana, it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, first of all, you obviously see the very natural human reaction of fear. People were petrified, especially as this was beginning and the bombardment was starting. Most of them have never experienced anything like this in their lifetime. They were taking shelter in subway stations. They were bringing their animals down there as well, with no sense of when they might be able to go up above ground. And a very real fear as well that there's nowhere safe to go in Ukraine. What's extraordinary, though, is that at the same time, we're seeing this incredible resistance and incredible courage. I mean, the images of a Ukrainian man literally kneeling down in front of a Russian tank, risking his life to try to stop it in its tracks and prevent it from moving on into the capital. And I interviewed yesterday as well at the train station where thousands and thousands of people are evacuating to the safer part of the country in the West every day. I interviewed a young woman. She and her friends own a bar here in Kyiv. They're now actually using it to make food to give to Ukrainian police authorities. She had put her mother on the train to get her out safely, but she decided to stay. And I said to her, you know, this is really striking that you would have the courage to stay when you could get on this train and at least get somewhere safer. And she said, I'm not the one who should leave. It's the Russians who should leave, and I won't leave before they do. And that really stayed with me, Dana, that kind of tenacity and courage. It's been pretty humbling to see it.
I'm sure it has. Thank you so much, and thank you for all of your reporting, Clarissa. Needless to say, you and your crew there should stay safe. And today, the United Nations will vote to hold a rare emergency special session on Monday. They're going to vote to hold that session on Monday about the Russian invasion. Joining me now is the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me. Let's first start with the news from the Ukrainian President Zelensky's office that the Ukrainians and the Russians will meet without preconditions on the Belarus border. What are you hearing about that, and how optimistic are you?
Well, that's a decision that the Ukrainian government has to make and that they have made, and we'll look forward to what comes out of those discussions. As you know, Dana, we lean in on diplomacy with the Russians throughout this process, and we hoped that that Putin would find a way to the negotiating table. And he made the unfortunate decision of aggression over diplomacy. But again, this news is another effort by the Ukrainians to find a way forward at the negotiating table.
Effort by the Ukrainians, but from the point of view of Russia, do you think, based on the diplomatic efforts that you were involved in up until now, that this is a good faith effort by the Russians?
You know, I can't get into the Russian, into Putin's head or into Russian reasoning. So it remains to be seen. But let's see what comes of it.
But the U.S. does support this move, this diplomatic effort.
We have always indicated that we wanted to find a diplomatic solution, and Russia chose confrontation. So again, this diplomatic effort is one more effort to bring the Russians to the negotiating table.
Okay, let's turn to new sanctions that were announced by Europe and the U.S., saying that they plan to remove, quote, certain Russian banks from the SWIFT system, the SWIFT financial system. But it wouldn't include the energy sector. As you know, that is a big part of the Russian economy. Why won't you remove all of the Russian banks and transactions from SWIFT?
Look, this process continues, and we're putting together the list, and we'll continue to work on that over the course of the next couple of days. Treasury can give you some details of what is going into the process, but the purpose of the sanctions are to put as much pressure on the Russian economy as possible, and we want to do as much as we can to protect the impact on our own economy. But we're continuing to look at new and even harsher measures against the Russians.